Hello developers, welcome to day 18 of the 30 days of JavaScript challenge. Today present another chance for us to engage with challenges and further enrich our understanding of JavaScript concepts. Let's dive in and make the most out of this learning journey. Today's challenge says, given a function fn and a time in milliseconds t, return a debounced version of that function. And it goes on and explains that a debounced function is a function whose execution is delayed by t milliseconds and whose execution is cancelled if it is called again within that window of time. The debounced function should also receive the passed parameters. So you can look at an example here. It says, for example, say t is equals to 50 milliseconds and the function was called at time 30, 60 and time 100 milliseconds. So the first two function call will be cancelled and the third function call will be executed at time 150. This is because when you first call it at 30 milliseconds, it will delay for 50 milliseconds. So the first call is expected to execute at time 80. But before it executes, it was called again at time 60. That means that this first function call was cancelled. And if it is called at time 60, and the delay time is 50, you expect the next call to happen at time 110. And since the third call happened at time 100, means this second call also was cancelled. And the third call will also take 50 milliseconds, so the third call will be executed after 50 milliseconds, that is at time 150. That's why I told here it will be executed at time 150. That is the third function, but these other two calls will be cancelled. And if the time t was 35, this first call will be cancelled because at time 30, if it was called at time 30, you expect the call to happen at time 65. But it was called again at time 60, means this first call didn't happen, so it will be cancelled. Then if it is called at time 60, you expect the next call to happen at time 95. And you can see since the third call is called at time 100, means this second call will happen successfully. So this one will be successful at time 95. Then at time 100, it will be called again, and the third call also will be successful at time 135. So basically that is how a debounce works, and there's a diagram here explaining the debounce. You can just go through it, and you're told to solve this challenge without using this debounce function. We will not use that, so let's just scroll. Then there's examples here. They're just same to what you have just looked. For example, this example 1 time t is 50, and if the first call happens at time 50, we expect it to be executed at time 100 because it's supposed to delay for 50 milliseconds. But this first call will be cancelled because the function will be called again at time 75 before this one executes. So this one will not happen, will not execute at all, but this second one will execute at time 125 because 75 plus 50 is 125. So that's how a debounce work. So you can just check on example 2, it's just the same thing, and also example 3. So yeah, we can look at the constraints. The constraint time t should be between 0 and 1000 milliseconds, and the number of calls can be between 1 to 10 calls, and each time can be between 0 to 1000 milliseconds. Again, call index I.t. Then calls index I input.length can be between 0 and 10. So that is the constraints. So you can just learn some key concepts if there's any, and if there's not, you can just go straight to the challenge to solve it. This challenge requires knowledge that you already know, so I'll just dive right into it. So I'll just create a function. Let me use the anonymous function syntax today. So I'll get a function called the debounce is equals to a function like that. This is the anonymous function syntax. Then this function, after that, it should take in a function fn and a time in milliseconds t. So it takes in another function fn and time t in milliseconds. Then you're expected to return another function, that is the debounce function. So I'll return another function. So this is a high order function. So I should return this other function. This function is the debounce function. And it tells that this function should receive arguments and run this function fn. So I can receive arguments here. I'll make use of the rest parameters. to make my function flexible. So this can take any number of arguments that are passed to it. So yeah, so we are told that a debounce function is a function whose execution is delayed by time t milliseconds. So let us first do this first before we proceed. So this debounce function, its execution should be delayed by time t milliseconds. And know that to delay a function, you can use the set timeout function. So I know that this set timeout function takes in a callback function and the delay time. And in this case, the delay time is time t. So in this callback function, you can call our function fn inside here. So I can write something like fn. Then I call it with the args that were passed up there. But I have to spread each individual item of the args like that. So this will make the function to delay for a time t before it executes this function here. Before it runs, it should delay for this time t. Then it continues and says that a function whose execution is delayed by time t milliseconds and whose execution is cancelled if it is called again within that window of time. So if this function is called again, so let's say you have already called it for the first time, it has waited for this time milliseconds, and if you want to call it again, you have to first clear the initial timeout. So I'll use the clear timeout. You already know to clear a timeout, you can use the clear timeout function. And this clear timeout takes in a timeout ID. And the timeout ID is returned by this set timeout. So I'll define my timeout ID up here like as a member variable. So I'll say let timeout ID. Then this timeout ID is what will be returned by this set timer like this. So I'll say this will return timeout ID. Then this timeout ID is what I'll use to clear my timeout. So I'll copy that and paste it here. So yeah. So now this is the debounce function. Because this function, if it is called, it will first wait for time t milliseconds for it to run. And if it is called again, it will clear the initial timer and restart the timer again. So that is how a debounce function should work. So I can just see it with an example. So I'll just use example 1. So in example 1, we are told that debounce is called time. So I'll just call debounce. I'll call it time t. You're not given the function, so I can just get my own function here. So I'll just say const fn. Let me use the arrow function syntax like that. So I'll just use it in one line. So this fn, let's say it takes any number or it takes any argument, let's say n, then it logs that. It logs that argument in the console like that. Okay, so I'll call debounce using this function fn. And example 1 says you call it using time t. So I'll call it time t. In this case, it's 50. In example 1, t is 50. So that is how I will do this debounce. I know that this debounce is a high order function, so it returns another function. So I can store that other function in a variable. I'll call it my function like that. Then this function should be called at time 50 and time 75. At time 50 should be called the input 1, then at time 75 should be called the input 2. So I'll call, and to call a function at a specific time, you can use the set timeout as you have seen up here. So I can just say set timeout. I should wait for, it takes in a callback function, you already know that. Callback function and the time t in milliseconds. So time, in this case, time 50. So after time 50, I want to call this my function with the input 1. Example 1, the input at time 50 is 1. Then at time 75, it should be 2. So I'll just duplicate this code. Then change the time to 75 like that. Then change the input to 2. So this function will be called twice. The first time it will be called at time 50 and the second time it will be called at time 75. So we expect that this debounce, after being called at the first time 50, it should be called, then it should wait for 50 milliseconds before it runs. But so it should run at time 100. But before time 100, this other function will have been called at time 75. That means that this function first call should be cancelled and this other call will be executed at time 125 as we have seen in the example. And then we expect in the console, in this case I expect 2 because I'm just logging the input. In this function, I'm just logging the input. So I can just save this code then run it. So I expect 2 in the console. And you can see indeed I got 2 because the second function is the one that was called. This second function call was the one that was run. This first one was ignored or was cancelled. So basically that is how a debounce function work. You can just try with example 2 and example 3. So that is it for this video, guys. See you in the next video. Peace out.